right, everyone. Thanks for tuning into the Sports Card Therapist, where I give you a behind-the-scenes look at my hobby hustle and sprinkle in some self-care and wellness on top of that. I'm Rob Gerard, your Sports Card Therapist, and whether if you're listening to me on iTunes, Spotify, or watching on YouTube, welcome to the podcast. And here we are, rounding out December, not fully at the end of them, but just about, where we have one or two left to go roundtables. It's been an incredible month of roundtables. I hope everyone had happy holidays, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah. Anything else that you might celebrate or might not celebrate. Hopefully everyone was well. Hopefully everyone stayed warm here in America. I know we had the huge cold front come through, so I hope everyone was safe and you know, you have a great end of 2022 going into the new year. And I am super excited about this episode today. I feel like I'm really grasping for the stars here, and I'm kind of out of my element a little bit with the guys we're going to be talking about today. But this is episode 135. This is roundtable number 10, I believe it's roundtable number 10, and this is high end cards. So gentlemen, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for coming on. And roundtable number 9, I'm sorry about that. Thank you for coming on and talking about high end cards. How you guys doing today?
Doing good.
Man. How you doing, Rob?
Doing well. So if you're watching on YouTube, you can see the guests that are on, but if you're listening on the podcast, we're going to go around and if you guys can introduce yourself and maybe just tell us your name, whether if it's your Instagram handle, Twitter handle, whatever you want to use, and then maybe just talk about the area of high-end cards that you're used to dealing in. So Kevin, if you want to go first.
Yeah, well, first off, Rob, thanks for having me on. Really looking forward to tonight. Should be a great discussion. So I'm Kevin Randall, the Captain 37 Sports Cards. I mainly deal on Instagram. You see me, at many card shows across the country. But I've just transitioned into cards full time in the last year. So starting to get my feet wet in other areas, but I'm known as a Tom Brady guy. So I really do a lot in Tom Brady high-end cards. That's where I specialize.
All right, beautiful. Thank you. And you know what, Kevin, you are... Every time I see that you're going to be posting a story sale, I'm always kind of looking for it, because your story sales are awesome. They go from anything from $50 Tom Brady's all the way up to like $5K, $10K. I don't want to make up things, but like, these Tom Brady cards, and I love how you'll say, listen, I grade cards. So if you're buying it raw from me, it probably won't gem. So don't ask. Like, you're pretty straightforward. You're like, but I've gotten, I think I've probably bought from you like 3 times, and each time it's been like 5 to 10 Tom Brady slabs, just like lower end ones, but nice ones to have, because Tom Brady is always going to be liquid. You know what I mean?
Listen, if you know me, I'm pretty upfront and open and honest. So, I try to be the same person that I am, in real life and on Instagram. So definitely, I appreciate the deals we've done in the past, Rob. More to come, I'm sure.
Absolutely. All right, Eric.
Yeah, my name's Eric Meyers, better known on Instagram as Howley_Hustle. I've been doing cards probably about 16, 17 years. I used to do almost exclusively vintage, and then made the mistake to going into modern. So I do probably about 30% vintage and the rest modern. But vintage is predominantly baseball, and modern is predominantly basketball. I don't really mess with any modern baseball at all, or any modern football. I do dabble in some vintage football and vintage basketball, but predominantly it's going to be probably 55 and before. So, 55 all the way back into the early 1900s, stuff like that. Wow. And I also do memorabilia as well. Traditionally stick with signed Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, and Negro League player baseballs, and some type ones. I like some. Now I do like baseball jerseys, vintage baseball jerseys. I'll mess with those.
Beautiful. And Eric, the first time, we've never actually met in person, but I know the first time that you and I spoke, you came on. You were the first guest on the show that Amil and I had for a little while, The Bounce, and you had come on. You were our first guest on there, and so that was my first chance getting to meet you. But you also work for PWCC, right? And even though you have the most Southern accent I've ever heard from anyone in my life, you're actually located out of the country now, right?
Right. I've been with PWCC going on about right at 2 years, and I'm located outside of Pyeongtaek, which is about an hour outside of Seoul. So I live in Korea for the next year and a half due to a contract. So I'll be here for a couple minutes, and then probably back to somewhere in America. Hopefully Texas. We'll see. I thought about Japan, thought about Germany, but my family's not getting any younger.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing. That just sounds like such a completely different life than I live right now. It's like,
Before this,
I
it was Hawaii, right? So
yeah, yeah. I mean, I live like 15 miles from where I was born and raised, you know what I mean? And so, I've definitely traveled the world, and been in a ton of different countries, but I can't imagine actually planting my flag there for a little while. So, kudos to you, man. That's amazing.
yeah.
And
By the time
what
we
was
get
that?
back, by the time we get back, it'll be almost 7 years since we've lived in
Wow.
continental U.S. Yeah, by the time we get back.
Wow, wow. All right. And last but certainly not least, someone that you may recognize. He was just on the show within the last month or two, bringing back Jason Koonce. Jason, how you doing, man?
Appreciate you having us, Rob. Hey, Eric, I got to ask, what time is it over there right now?
It is 10 a.m.
All right.
Tomorrow. I'm in here tomorrow.
Yeah, I appreciate you joining us. Getting up. That's early in car dealer time. So I appreciate you joining us
Jason,
early in the morning.
I got to get up at 3:30 or 4 in the morning, Monday through Friday, to go to work. So
Yeah,
this is a nice late start for me.
That's crazy. That's crazy. So yeah, I appreciate you joining us. I'm Jason Koonce, Otia Sports. I feel like a dinosaur. I've been in the business for close to 30 years. I just went to my 28th straight national. To kind of give perspective, St. Louis 1995 was my first and haven't missed one. Mostly do vintage, but honestly, I'm spread out across the board. Memorabilia, modern, checks, photo match, jersey, like literally anything you can think of, I've accumulated throughout the years. So, but my main focus would be what I consider the slow, steady, safe investments, which is, pre 1960, 40s, 50s, 60s, high grade, and not necessarily even high grade, but just quality vintage of rock star players and rare items.
Wow. Well, that's great. I mean, it sounds like, in a way, it almost sounds like you three are incredibly similar with what you collect and the direction that you're going. But at the same time, it's you guys really have diversified portfolios, it feels like. And when you're, I think, dealing with the high end cards, I think the reason why it's so cool to watch people or to bring people on that are really in that upper echelon is because I know hundreds, if not thousands, of people that really deal with, low to mid end cards, right? And like low end meaning, I'm going to use the card ladder definition, $500 or less. Mid end being 500 to 5K. That's kind of in my mind where I've kind of had those figures. Although if I'm picking up a $4,000 card, that feels pretty high end to me. You know what I mean?
I agree.
Right. So, but yeah, so, with high end, is there anything that you guys in your mind just stay away from? And you guys can jump right in. Like we're going in no order here with talking, but is there anything that you're like, I just stay away from it because to me, it does not feel like safe?
Yeah, I mean, I think that even though we all collect different stuff, we're kind of all on the same page with really don't do a ton of modern high-end prospecting. Eric, I know you said you do basketball, so I'm curious to hear if you're into the modern high-end basketball prospects. But, when it comes to football, I set up at a card show today, and I had somebody who wanted a high-end Tom Brady card, and they asked if I would take on some trade. And of course, because, you want to move high-end cards these days, you have to be willing to take on some trade. But all he had was, Justin Herbert, Jalen Hurts, Burrows, all this, younger high-end stuff, some Trevor Lawrence in there. It's great stuff. I like looking at it. I might dabble in it here and there, but it's not stuff I'm ever going to get into in terms of moving a gold card. So really, if I'm moving high-end Brady stuff or Jordan and things like that, I want to get similar stuff back. I don't mess much in the super high-end market and get caught up in that rookie hype. I mean, listen, in terms of leveling up, there can be some big gains made there, but, I'm more of a low risk, lower reward versus high risk, high reward type, collector investor. So that's just my mindset.
I think we're all probably in that same category. The three of us here we prefer to hang out into the low to mid end risk and low to mid end reward type investment as opposed to the high risk. I'm with Kevin on that. I don't really mess with upper end prospecting in football because namely it's a contact sport, right? And I don't care how good you are. I mean, Burrow started off great a couple years ago, blew out his knee. You just can't predict the contact sports. And not only that, but I've also, like I said, spent 4 years in Hawaii, lived here in Korea for a couple of years. After a while, and you start getting a better perspective of the global market, you can understand what it is that people outside the U.S. buy, and not a lot of them buy football. So if the player does recede or pull back a little bit, your market to sell that thing is small in the global perspective of things, if you will. So I traditionally, if I'm going to prospect, it's going to be in basketball, maybe a little baseball, but I might pick one player in baseball, and that's it. That's if I do. As of right now, I don't even prospect any baseball at all. If it's basketball, it's going to be, to me, prospecting in basketball because I deal in most of the older stuff like Jordan, Kobe, maybe Duncan or some of the other like all-time great players, people with multiple chips. To me, prospecting would be maybe Luka and Giannis. I could see maybe Tatum, but that's about it. Curry. Well, Curry's a GOAT, right, at this point. But other than that, man, I don't really mess with any of the prospecting stuff. I'd rather, and the reason for that is, I'll try to make it pretty quick, but the reason for that is you have about a 5-year window for a player, and I don't care how good you are. If you're really accomplished, well, and I get it, the market's pulled back some. So let's look at Luka. His RPA was selling like 240, 250K at the peak for 9.5. Now they're like 170, 180, but he's actually gotten better. But the window for his achievements in correlation towards market price starts to recede after year 3. So you might prospect and really love Luka, and I love him. I'm from Dallas, right? So I love Luka. But if he goes into year 4 and 5 and hasn't won a chip, granted he's got it to one Western Conference final, people kind of start to get stale on him, and the prices come back, and then you can buy it. If you don't get in the first season, just wait, in my opinion. For me, this is just how I do my show.
I was going to say, I actually just had a similar talk with someone the other day, and it's like, I think Panini and soon to be Fanatics have kind of backed themselves into a corner here with just the stuff isn't really rare anymore. Like I'm not sure if you know this trivia. Like, how many Trevor Lawrence 101s do you think there are?
6,000 something. I saw the same thing.
I'd say probably about 65.
What's your answer out?
I think 3,000.
So it's 6,000 different rookies, but I think it's like 1,100 101s.
Oh man, that's crazy.
So to me, that just kind of, so if someone came to me and said, "Hey, I want a Trevor Lawrence rare card," I could find that tomorrow. The card that me and this high-end collector were actually discussing was, he wanted a Bill Russell 8.5 or 9, and that's a card that, I know where a 9 is, but the guy's, going to be a crazy price. But, if that guy doesn't want to sell, I can't go find this collector of Bill Russell 8 or 9, where this modern stuff is, I could find 5 different examples in 10 minutes. So to me, that's what kind of defines the rarity of the vintage, is like when you really can't find it, that's what makes something like truly rare, where this modern stuff for a while definitely felt rare. But it just seemed like it was an illusion now that people are starting to sell in this economy and stuff's hitting the market, and you're seeing a massive amount of this 2020 and 21 product. And it's like, to me, it kind of just, it's not that I was ever like a big fan of it, but it's really lost its luster. Like all these auctions, you just keep seeing the same, it's like, even though Joe Burrow's a great quarterback, it's like how many different patch autos to 25 and all that stuff. It's like, so yeah, I mean, I just circled back to, if you want to gamble really quick on one of these football guys, yeah, it's fun to take a shot. But I think people really need to understand, especially the new people coming in, that, because on Instagram, let's face it, like a lot of times people are kind of posting a fake, that's social media in general, right? They're posting like this fake life, right? So I don't think it's the reality for a new person coming in thinking that they're going to have this opportunity to like 10x their money overnight. But that's kind of what a lot of people give off, when the reality is it's a really good chance that you're going to invest in somebody and lose, like Zach Wilson, like or the Mac
good
Jones 101 that sold for 175,000 last year. Like that's a card that could realistically be $1,000 in a couple of years. That's a pretty big hit. I don't think if you put 175,000 into Jordan rookies or Mantle rookies or anything of that nature, like your downside is almost zero versus your upside in the next 10 years, in my opinion. It's slower and steady, but you're not going to have that 99% shot of a loss, which is a very real thing in this world right now.
I think it's important in my space to convey that message, Jason, to a lot of people. And I get a lot of new people coming into the hobby want to prospect and they want to chase that gamble and that risk. But when I get to know somebody new in the hobby, for me, whether it's a customer or somebody that's big coming into the hobby and I'm trying to figure out where they're at, I ask them and say, hey, what is your long-term goal? I have to ask myself that all the time. What's your long-term goal? Are you prospecting? Is it 20, 30%? Is it like, do you want to put 30% high risk and the rest 70% into long-term stable market growth? And it's almost like you're helping people manage their monetary portfolio. And that's the best way. But I have people stick to that. I tell them, if you're coming into the hobby, stick to it for 1 year minimum. Don't vary. Don't move any. Just this is your goal. So that way you can work on your discipline. Because that's really what's going to carry you through the bad times, right? Is being disciplined to your behavior patterns. So if you can just manage that, the rest kind of works itself out. And it helps you learn. Because if you're just going from one space to the next space, to this, to that, at the end of the year, you might have lost money, you might have made money, but you really didn't learn a whole lot. You didn't learn how to refine a niche or refine your own personal behavior pattern and really analyze where you should have pivoted or where you should have made different decisions. And then you can learn to grow. If maybe you only had 15% vintage, but then you look at your portfolio over the past 12 months and where that has gone up or gone down. Well, heck, maybe that was the only place that somebody made the money. So then they start going from 15 to 20% to 30% to 40%. Because Jason's probably like me. Maybe he probably didn't start off with vintage. He might have. But over time, that vintage portfolio amount, like I said, could be 80% vintage. Probably didn't start there. Probably started somewhere in the 40, 50% range. But over time, through making mistakes, good decisions, bad decisions, he looks back and goes, man, maybe I should move that to 60%, 70%, 80%. Because there's better ROI in the next 5 to 10 years. And I think people have to learn how to make those decisions on themselves. But a refinement of behavior patterns is the best way to do that, from my perspective.
No, I agree. I think that, I had a lot of friends come into this space in the last couple of years. Obviously, the COVID boom and, the stuff was everywhere, social media, a card sales on ESPN and things of that nature. And, they'll say, hey, Kev, I have X amount of money. What do you think I should do with it? And my first question is always, okay, are you a short-term player or a long-term player? Right. I think that's something that people have to come to terms with. Because, the names that Jason rattled off, Jordan, Mantle, I'll throw Brady in there, Gretzky, all the GOAT stuff. I mean, you're buying that stuff right now. You're not quick flipping that for a huge profit. This is slow and steady growth, as Eric mentioned. So, I mean, I look back at, because 5-6 years ago, the most expensive card you would have seen in my showcase was probably $2,000. But, things have changed, right? The cards that I've been able to sell and make big profits on that allowed me to get into the high end game more are stuff I've had for 5+ years. So, those quick hits where you make a monster profit, they're few and far between on the newer stuff. So I really think you got to determine whether you're a short-term or a long-term player. And then, you start spending your money accordingly based on where you are.
Along with your risk tolerance, and I think if people understand it, it's totally fine. Like if you want to put 100% of your bankroll into brand new stuff and take a shot, if you understand the risk, like that's fine. I just think a lot of people come in and they don't understand the risk. And then, they go to sell some stuff and they've opened a lot of wax and they don't realize wax is way worse than going to the casino. It's like a lottery ticket, right? And they've like, hey, I just spent $50,000 on this wax. And I'm like, it's worth $3,000. And there's like this look of confusion because like they didn't even understand it when they were opening it because they saw other people on Instagram like, oh look, I just pulled a $100,000 card. I just pulled it. So it's been probably very humbling for a lot of people to really learn the hard way. But a lot of us have all learned the hard way. So it's unfortunate that happens. But I would like to see less people learn the hard way, but maybe that's when you learn. Maybe that's when it's the hard way. Maybe sets you up long term for better success. So maybe it's good. I feel like we've all had that hard lesson. So Yeah, but I hate to see it though, because it sucks when someone comes in and just takes a bath, and then what the problem is they come in, they get crushed, and then they leave.
Exactly.
And that's never good long term for our business.
Yeah, and just to jump in real quick, I don't want to make this sound like that. Hey, invest in the goats and you're completely all set. Because let's not pretend that the goats weren't part of the drop. What's happened, right? I think that something important Jason brought up earlier is having rare stuff, right? So when people ask me, hey, you got these high end cards. What's your long term play? What are you sitting on long term? Well, I'm sitting on the stuff that you don't see at auction houses, 2 to 3 times a month. Right, like the stuff that I'm confident in long term is the rare stuff, right? That you see sell maybe 2 to 3 times a year versus 2 to 3 times per month or more. So I think that it's not like the goats have been immune to a drop. Well, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that Brady stuff didn't drop, right? But it's about having the right stuff and figuring out what the right stuff is, and that's all part of getting the education, like Eric said, in the learning curve.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. The people need to remember that even the goats drop, but then you have to look at it prospectively long term. Yeah, and I like what was also said is, you don't want people to get crushed, especially. So I don't know who the people y'all do with. I know Jason for sure. When you deal with those top 1% people who come into the hobby, and they might have $5 million to spend liquid, and they might want to spend it pretty quick. Some people spend 5, 10, 15, 20, $40 million. They might spend that in a year or two, right? You don't want those people getting crushed. And I don't want anybody getting crushed, but rising tides lift all ships, right? And that's just the nature of reality in the world we live in. I want to make sure those people are making highly informed decisions, and I'm doing my due diligence to get them a positive ROI on the things that I'm advocating that they purchase. Because as those people come in and they feel safer in the space, and maybe after a year or two they break even, but they've had a lot of fun, they'll look at that as a net positive. They'll absolutely look at that as a net positive and bring their other friends in who have high net worth. And if I can help take care of those people as well and guide them in the right direction, that expands, and then it trickles down to everything. Because there's a lot of people in the hobby, and it's really only like half of the top 1%. So you're talking maybe, literally 0.1% that are moving the hobby, right? Because those are the cards that you see on ESPN, on Fox News, on CNN. Those are the ones that you see always come on, when you're watching a basketball game, this card sold for $3 million or $4 million or $5 million or $10 million, right? And then people who aren't in the hobby then come into the hobby, right? So I want to make sure from my perspective that those people are making the best decision that I can present them with.
The reality is in this market too, if, in the last 20 years, if you would have bought really good stuff at any point in the last 20 years, other than maybe that 4 to 5 month block of February to whatever, like in the last
January,
20 years, if you would have bought really good stuff at any point in that 20 years, other than that crazy time where we all lost our minds during COVID, you would be up on your collection. Like you would be, and the farther back you go, you'd be significant, way up. So, and it's not to say that some of the stuff from that crazy peak won't be back there in 5 to 10 years. It's like any other market, stock market, crypto. Like if you buy at the absolute worst peak top, like it's just not good. That's kind of why, I always tell people cost average in over a few years, and, don't just, because you can never time any market. So, but the reality is, out of 1,000 months, if I don't know what the math is, but let's just say 1,000 months, 5 of those months were bad, and no, it wouldn't be 1,000 months, but 250 months or whatever, 5 would be bad and 240 would be good. So it's just avoiding that really bad time, last February, March, April, May.
Yeah, and also another thing to point out, Jason, is I try to formulate really strong relationships with the people that I deal with, and if they can trust what it is I'm saying, that during those 4 or 5 months, let's say they come back in 4 or 5 years, let's say in 2027 they come back, you have 3 or 4 months, it's just a huge ramp up, it goes parabolic, hockey stick, what they like to call it, whatever. I need my customers and my friends that I've built these relationships with to listen to me when I'm saying, hey, now's the time to sell, right? This is the time that you make your money. Pick what it is you're really, really wanting to move. Keep a couple items that you're probably going to keep long term. But if there's any part of you that wants to get rid of it, that's the time to move, right? And I don't have the pocketbooks that Jason does, right? And I hope I get there one day, right? But it's important to build those relationships with people for them to have trust in the things that I say. So that way, that when the time comes, they can make their profit. But that trust is built along the way and getting them into the right items that aren't as volatile. So when that market does ramp up, they know when to exit out. Because I saw a lot of people that during that, so it was basically January to April, during that 4-month span, right, that Koonce was alluding to. During that 4-month span, it's important that you recognize that that's the moment to exit, because that's where you make a lot of your margins. And that can offset some of the bad hits or bad decisions you've made in previous years. And that will, as he had said before, that cost averages everything and it puts it in the positive aspect of things. And it's important to know when to pull the trigger and to let things go.
And that's a lesson for everybody, right? I mean, myself included, right? I mean, it's so funny. Nobody wanted to sell anything in that 5-month stretch. And now when the market's down, everybody's selling everything, right? It's just, it's so crazy how that works. The amount of panic selling we're seeing right now. But it's an education, right? You gotta, you can't expect to be in this 1 or 2 years and know exactly when to sell and exactly when to buy and things like that. It's a learning curve.
Yeah, absolutely.
The emotions of the stock market and the card market are like so identical. It's insane. Because like you said, like everybody thought like when stuff was crazy, they thought it was going to 10x even more. And like now there's this panic, and like I think we're close to the bottom. If not, it's soon, because we're at the point now where people are starting to come in and say, okay, like this is ridiculous. And I'm starting to cost average some stuff that, I'm starting to buy again pretty heavily, just because some of these prices are silly. I mean, everything, honestly, like whether it's Rolexes, cryptos, I mean, everything's at a discount right now. So it's actually, although I've probably, you said I had a big pocketbook. I mean, I'm probably down 100 million in the last year. So like, it's pretty painful, but like the only positive of that is there's a lot of stuff now that got out of control that now I'm like looking and picking off and being able to add, like, not to get too far off subject, but like, here's an example. I'm really big into video games too, like the Seal video games. And there was a point where Sonic 1, I think one sold for 430,000 at like the craziness.
Wow.
I bought one in PWCC like a month ago or 2 or 3 weeks ago I think it was 1 grade lower, but it was like 20 grand. So that was a video game that I didn't want to spend hundreds of thousands for. And I'm like, shoot, I missed the boat on it, and then that's an asset that came way back down, and I was able to buy one. And I do think that video game will go back to those levels in 10 years. But like, it just went to a price that I was uncomfortable with. And then when it came back down, I'm like, okay, cool. I can add this into my collection now at a comfortable price. So that's the benefit of everything going down.
So, Jason, we shouldn't have opened my son's Sonic video game for Nintendo Switch, is what you're telling me? Now I'm devastated. All right. Okay.
Are there any vintage cards that you've maybe moved over the past year or two, Jason, that you wish you'd kept?
If we got into stuff that I've sold that I regret, we could talk for a week.
No, I mean, just the past year or two. I mean, like, are there any like ones that you probably wish you think you should have held on to, or?
So my general rule is I try to have duplicates of stuff. So I generally don't sell anything crazy unless I know I can replace it. Like like I don't own a Bill Russell. I have a Bill Russell 8. I don't have a Bill Russell 9. Like, but that's a card that if I owned, I don't think I could sell it because there's like a chance I could never replace it. But I sold a Jordan 10 because I know. And the only time I ever sell anything is literally to go buy other cards. It's like every time I buy something, sell.
I think we're all guilty of that. We're all guilty of that.
Like I'm never selling a card to like go buy something fun. It's to buy. Well, it is fun, but I would sell a Jordan 10 because I know I may have to pay a little more, but I can always go buy another Jordan 10.
BGS 10 or PSA 10?
PSA 10.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not like a crazy card. I'm just giving you an example of like something that I sold that I'm just like, okay, it's 180 grand or whatever. But I know at any time if I want to replace that, and I only had one left of those. I have a bunch of 9s 8s and raw and all that. But I was kind of just flipping through some boxes, and I was like, I need to raise a quick little bit of money to buy some stuff. And here's a card that I'll be able to buy back at any time I want one. So there's an example of how I look at things.
Jason, let me ask you something, okay? So you're flipping through boxes, you need to raise funds, right? And you see you have a Jordan PSA 10. Now, are you immediately like calling people you know to make that sale privately, or are you posting that on an auction house?
That one I sold privately. It was actually it was harder to sell than I thought, just because it to me that was like a very liquid card for a while, and that kind of shows where we're at in the tightness of the economy. But either or, like, like I keep some stuff in my PWCC vault. I keep some stuff in a safety deposit box. I keep stuff. We actually built a vault about a half hour from my house at like an art gallery that I keep a lot of stuff at. So I have stuff spread out everywhere. So it's like, if I need to pay a PWCC bill, I just go into my vault and I'm like, click, 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 send to auction, and it covers, that. But anytime I do it, it's still a struggle. Like, even if I have, hundreds of something, the like diehard collector in me is like trying to figure out a way. It's like, can I go pawn my wife's wedding ring and, rather than sell these, these cards, which is like a total sickness that I think a lot of us suffer from. So that's why I'm saying I always try to sell stuff that I know I can replace. Like a lot of the memorabilia, some of the cards I've been selling have been to buy photo matched game jerseys. And the photo matched game jerseys I have are one of a kind. They're the only one. Like, that's the stuff that I can never replace.
So let me jump in and ask you guys a quick question here, because this is something that I always kind of mull over back and forth in my head, and I'm curious to what you guys would think about this. So earlier last year, I spent a good portion of what I was doing in the hobby to work my way up to the big LeBron card, right? The Ultimate Collection card. To me, that was like, okay, this is going to be the biggest card I've ever purchased. However, I had multiple people who deal in mid to high end cards say, you know what, Rob, like, rather than getting, say, the card was about 100K at the time, right? Rather than getting 100K card, you should think about getting 50 $2,000 cards. Really diversify yourself and give yourself a much more chance, rather than pushing all your chips into that card. So would you guys prefer to have one huge card? Because I know there's a lot of collectors, right, that are consolidating, leveling up, and are always trying to kind of work their way up. Would you prefer to have that one big card, or a small, or more smaller cards to
Always
work with?
the biggest card you can, from my opinion, right? If it's going to be for your PC rep, something that you're going to have years to come.
That's the point I wanted to talk about. Yeah.
Right. So if it's something that you got to, and again, a lot of this is self-reflection. When I'm talking, I just assume people have dived in and taken a deep talk to themselves in regards to self-reflection. You have to be honest with yourself. Is this something I'm going to sell in the next 1 to 3 years? Because if the answer is yes, at your core, if the answer is yes, then you need to buy some smaller cards. But if the answer is no, it's going to be in the collection 3 years or longer, or 5 years or longer, then push all the chips in, and that's your card. That's it. But you've got to know yourself, man. And I've talked about this a lot of times on podcasts, right? You have got to know yourself and be honest with yourself. Because I sold 2 huge vintage cards that have been eating me up every night for the past year, and that I should have kept, right? Because I listened to other people. Instead, I'm always constantly reflecting upon myself on what it is I'm doing, what I should be doing, what I need to do, right? And I knew that I was in the right position, but I listened to other people, and it put me in a situation where I was like, oh, crap. Now I can't ever get those cards back. And the stuff I bought was more modern. It's pulled back like 50%. So I'm down, $300-400 grand.
Do you want to share with us what those 2 vintage cards were?
I had a PSA 9 Ted Williams 39 play ball.
Wow.
That's a pop 12. Koonce probably seen 1 or 2 of those. And I had a dead centered, and I mean dead centered, 50-50 all the way around, 48 leaf page PSA 7. And those don't come up, man. Those do not come. And those are my two favorite vintage players. And Babe Ruth is after Ted Williams and then Page. So that's my top three. And I've got some other Ruth stuff that I'm not going to move for a while, right? And I had been working almost my whole entire career to get those two cards because I love Satchel Paige and I love Ted Williams. Those are my two players. I'd been working to get those cards in that grade. And I had them for less than a year. And an opportunity came up. And I didn't want to do it, but it was a good friend of mine. And he was on me. And I let him go. And I was like, okay, well, I did okay to where, there's no way this is going to go wrong. Fast forward a year, and I've lost all that I made on the cards plus 2x that, right? So that was a painful mistake. And I should have listened to my behavior patterns, which I knew. Push your chips in, get the stuff for long term, and just let it sit. Just pretend like it doesn't exist. Just let it sit, man. And the other stuff, you flip, you make, you lose, whatever, who cares? Because at the end of the day, for me, like I've got this top one photo. That's actually the first print. The Babe bows out. That's after the first negative. That's the actual picture that won the Pulitzer Prize, right?
Wow.
The Babe bows out. Yeah. So like that one, I'm gonna keep that a while. I learned on the other mistakes. I've got some nice Babe Ruth baseballs. Ones, I mean, they're really nice. They're probably two of the top 25 nice Ruth balls there are. And after selling those two cards, I've learned, I ain't doing that no more, man, because that's painful. I mean, Koonce has probably lost money this year too, a ton of money, just like we all have. You make some mistakes, you want to do it again.
What I'm hearing you say is like there really is no secret recipe, right? Because on one hand, a few minutes back, you said, what, like, when it feels like the time is right, you need to sell, and you gotta like kind of, so that way you could at least come out somewhat in a net positive, right? But then on the other hand, you're saying, well, you know what, I sold and I was kind of going against my gut. I thought it was going to be good and it wasn't. So it's like,
so you move this stuff that you'd already decided upon to sell, right? Because I had made the decision, all this stuff I'm going to sell, these few items I'm going to keep. Once I broke that code and I was like, okay, well then I'm going to move this from the keep into the sell item, and I sold it. I knew right then there's a chance that was probably a bad decision because I'd already set up my behavior patterns, which I was going to do. And then I was like, well, now's the time to make money, even though I've told myself, hey, don't even think about selling it for 5 or 10 years, and I broke that pattern. And then that's where it bit me in the butt. Because, and that's how I talk to my same customers. Look, if you're going to buy stuff and it's long-term hold, just leave it there. All the other stuff, let's say you have $1 million in stuff or 2 million, you have $1 million of it in a couple items that's long-term hold, and you have $1 million of it that's just stuff that's fluid. If the market goes through the roof, the stuff that's fluid, sell it all, every bit of it, everything. Just cash it out right then. The stuff you want to keep, you'd already said you're going to keep no matter what happens. That stuff you're just going to hold true because that's your long-term profit. Right, you can make your short-term profit here. The long-term profit you need to hold.
Yeah. So Rob, back to your question: would you rather have the $100,000 card or a bunch of $2,000 cards? I think it goes back to that short-term versus long-term play, right? So, I'm seeing it shows a lot of bigger dealers out there much more willing right now to trade down on bigger items than they've been in a long time because so for me, people aren't walking into shows right now with 20, 30, 40, 50. There's only one show that happens at for me, and it's the National. Right. Maybe you could throw Dallas in that mix. I've only been to Dallas once, and there was a good amount of cash in that room, despite, where the economy and market is. Right. But, if you ask me that question right now, I mean, I have a different lens now. Right. So, Jason talked about the fact that it's so tough to sell certain stuff because he's such a collector at heart. That's going to be my biggest transition. Right. Because I was a keep everything guy because I love cards. I've been collecting since I was 5 years old. I'm a huge collector at heart still. But now doing this full time and that I'm not teaching anymore, and this is now paying the bills and the mortgage, right? I got to have a little bit of a different lens. I still have my stuff that I'm going to keep long term, right? But I had to have a heart to heart with my PC and go through and say, all right, I got to narrow this down a little bit, right? Because some of these items are going to be used to pay bills. So I mean, right now, looking at it from a dealer perspective, who's paying the bills with cards right now, I would rather have the bunch of $2,000 cards there just because they're, and honestly. Right now at the smaller local shows, a $2,000 card can be tough to move without taking on some trade, right? I deal with a different clientele than Jason and Eric deal with, obviously, right? But from what I'm saying, I'd much rather have the quantity, and that's going to cost people less versus the big card. But in terms of, what I'm going to sit on long term, it's bigger stuff, like Eric said. I would much rather have a bigger card that I'm going to sit on for 5, 10, 15, 20 years versus, 50 different smaller cards of the same player.
I mean, I would guess from a dealer standpoint, I mean, like setting up at a show, as far as what you would want in your inventory, my guess is you would want 90% of your inventory in $5 to $50 stuff, because that's what right now in this economy people are going to be eating up. Like we're just in a different world than we were a year or two ago. So, but it'll change. I mean, everything goes through its flows, and I just think whether it's low end or high end, there's going to be a lot of opportunity coming up now and in the next 6 months until this levels out, and a lot of other factors kind of have a little more clarity and where we're at. But it really sucks, because everybody wishes they could sell at the peak and time this market, but like the reality is, any market, if you could time a market, you would be a trillionaire. So like, don't beat yourself up. When I've held, like I said, I've lost on paper in the last year like an insane amount of money, and at times I beat myself up a little bit. But like the reality is, if the market would have went up, if I would have sold and the market would have went up another 5x, I would have beat myself up again. So like, you really, it's just such a hard, I don't know. It's a hard thing to like, it's a hard question to answer because it's impossible to time markets. So, like I said, I'm starting to cost average and buy some stuff that I missed out on and that I feel comfortable with. And, it's just different.
I think it's better to, and I keep harkening back onto this, right? It's better to time your heart than it is to time the market. I mean, if everybody could time the market perfect, you'd be Nancy Pelosi's husband, right? I mean, that's that's probably the best person to time the market, But now, and I'm with Jason right now. Now I'm buying stuff for my personal collection. Like I've only bought one item in the past 4 months that I'm not going to keep long term. I bought some really rare Kobe autos that I'm absolutely in love with. That I couldn't. There was a card that offered the dude like 110, 120K for towards the peak. He would. I mean, we were way off. I just picked it back. I just got it from, because I've been on him for 4 years about it. I got it for like 75 grand.
Wow.
Thank God. So like, I'm picking up stuff now to where I know my heart, and I know I don't care if it goes down 20%. I'm good to keep this stuff right now for a long time. Like there's cards now that I'm looking for that nobody's probably looking for, and I'll pay way top dollar for them just because I believe in that player. I believe in that card. And if I don't make money on it, I honestly don't care. It's cards I've probably been chasing for a couple of years. And that's what I'm hoping for now. Especially, I think between now, I think the market will start picking back up around April or May, towards close to the summer, right? It's my honest opinion. I think over the next couple of months, if stuff comes out that you've really been chasing, I would kind of lean towards going after it. Because I agree with Koonce. If we're not at the bottom, man, we've got to be pretty dang close. We've really got to be close, because like I'm really knowledgeable Jordan BGS 95s and PSA 10s. That's something I'm really strong in my wheelhouse. You pick at mini gyms, probably cash at a show for 24, 25K for mini gym Jordan 95. I don't see that card hitting in the teens. I don't see it hitting 18, 19K. I had customers telling me about PSA 10 Jordans. They feel like it could go down to 90K. I don't see that. I don't see PSA 10 Jordan go down to 90K. I see way too many people like me, maybe Koonce. They drop down to 120, 115, and we're just gonna buy them all. I'm not gonna wait for that thing to go down to 90K. There's no point.
There's definitely a floor on a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
So, and obviously buying stuff for your PC, but there's also like a ton of moves right now there's so many things being auctioned, so many different auction houses selling stuff. Like stuff's gonna slip through the cracks. I'm not gonna say what the item was because it'll reveal, and where the auction was. But I bought something 2 weeks ago for $55,000, and I flipped it for 90 like the next day. And it was something that just completely slipped through the cracks, and it's because there was so much stuff being auctioned in the course of that weekend. And I bid on a lot of stuff, and then when we go into extended bidding, I'm like, okay, it's people are not spending the way they were a year ago. Some stuff's going to go cheap. And then a week later, some of that stuff that went way too cheap, people are going to say, oh shit, like that went too cheap, and you can flip out of it. So there's a lot of opportunity right now. Like I wouldn't it's easy to get discouraged right now, but a lot of money is made in down market. Like I've made a lot more money in down market. Well, it's hard to say that because appreciation's been really good, but I've done really well in down markets as I have in up markets.
Yeah, I think you brought up a good point too. I mean, I'm comping stuff left and right now to prep for shows, and the last show I set up at, I'm comping a couple Brady cards, and I saw a low comp on I won't mention the marketplace, but a certain marketplace, right? And I check it somewhere else, it sold for double within 2 days of each other, right? So back to your point, I mean, this is a great buying opportunity. All of my friends that have been in cards for a long time and have a lot of card knowledge are spending a ton of money right now. It's like I'm putting an advertisement, hey, go spend money, otherwise you're done, right? All I'm saying is to agree with what you said, Jason, there's opportunity, right? If you can, keep up with all of these auction houses and all these marketplaces that are selling cards, you're going to find some stuff that's going to fall through the cracks and get some great deals. Well, you might be able to flip, a GOAT card a lot sooner than you think for a good profit margin, like it sounds like you did. So, I mean, there's deals to be had out there right now if you can keep up with everything that's being flooded to the market right now.
Yeah, and don't be afraid to move some stuff. And if you're in a situation like Koonce had just spoke about, I tell customers all the time, don't be afraid to take an L over here instead of sitting on that card much longer to free up liquidity to buy something that you look at as really cheap. Because there's too many places like us, PWCC will give you advances or stuff on auction, where you take a loan out in your vault, and there's probably a multitude of places that'll do that. If you see something that you like somewhere else and it's going really low compared to what you feel the market is or the value is on that item, man, move something. Take an advance, run something on auction, take a loan out, and try to make that play, make that opportunity. Because there are times, like Koonce said, that you can make 60, 70, 80% on an item. If you really know that market. I saw a marketplace that had a 9.5 Kobe credentials that sold for 60-something thousand. That card at its peak was like 285, 300 grand. I think one sold for over 300 grand. 60K was crazy. That's probably about what that card was worth before he died. Like, I just can't even imagine. I mean, it's like a pop 9 card. I think that card was a great buy in that marketplace or stuff. I think LeBron RPAs, if they go much lower, I'm not even a big LeBron buyer at all. Man, if they go much lower, I might be a LeBron buyer. I mean, go ahead.
I just bought, it's funny you said Kobe credential because that card's insanely rare. I just bought a PSA 8 for $7,500. So maybe 7,500 or 9,000 out the door with the juice. And I needed to replace it. And the only reason I didn't have one is in the craziness of the market, I had a really close friend who I probably doesn't respect money or has infinite pockets. And he really wanted it from me. And I told him I didn't want to sell it. And eventually he gave me an offer that was like so absurd that I said, fine, here, like, I think you're overpaying, but take the card. And, it was probably, I think it was like 110,000 at the time for a Kobe Credential 8. This was peak. And I had no interest in selling it, but obviously there's a price for everything. So I sold it, and now I just bought it back for 9,000. So,
wow.
How do you beat that? Like, and to me, like, I would buy all 499 of them at 9,000 a piece.
Yeah.
So,
and a 9.5 for 60 grand.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah. I mean, I was bidding on it, except there was a Ruth baseball that was selling on, I forgot what, I think gray flannel or something. And I put all my chips to try to chase that. But that thing, so I had all my money tied up bidding on that. If not, I would have bought that card and some other cards in that platform. And the Ruth ball wound up going for 360, which was 2x its last comp, double. So and so its all-time high in 8.5 was like 180 grand. And then this one was a really strong 8.5. It went for 360. So even in the market's pulling back, there is memorabilia that's going up 50%, 2x, not on a outlier, but that stuff is that's where the market is on that stuff right now. And it's getting to know a multitude of different, I mean, that's probably what's made Koonce as successful as he has. It's not just having a strong data information base on one specific area. It's a multitude of areas. Something like you mentioned, video games. All right, well, that interests him. You can make game use bats, game use jerseys, sneakers, whatever, and just know how to pivot and then just dive a lot of time, learn as much knowledge as you can on that specific area, get as intellectual as you can on it, and then make an informed decision. But after doing that for years and years and years, you then have a broad spectrum of information put in your head of where you know how to make plays. If this is going down over here, well, this might be going up over here. If that's going down over here, that go up over there. Because like I've noticed, vintage stuff going up, but you can't get into it now. I guess you could use buy 52 manuals, and you see a lot of people doing that. It's best to have the knowledge ahead of time. So when certain markets pull back, you already know where to make those plays. Game use stuff is a great play now. Rare single sign baseballs is a great play right now. And those markets are going up. Vintage in a lot of different grades of high-end play, of good name players have just steadily been going up. I think right now, vintage basketball is undervalued. I'm not sure if the Asian market, I try to really encourage them to do it. I go to the Philippines a lot, Japan, Thailand, China and stuff. I try to get them to embrace, because if the Asian market can start to embrace, they look at their basketball started in 1986, basically, to almost the entire Asian market. There was no basketball before 86 in their perspective, right? But if I can ever crack that and get them to actually start looking into the Bird Magics, the Dr. J's, Gervins, or any of those other players, Russells, Wilts, Oscars, Pete Maravich, a lot of those players, man, that stuff has a lot of room to grow. And you see Wilt 9s right now, what, in the 220s, 250s, which to me is cheap. I feel like that's a $500,000 card. I think there's 32 of them.
I have so much crazy Wilt stuff. I'm so big on Wilt. I mean, yeah. If you ever get them to convert into the Bird Magic and Dr. Let me know. I have a few of each of all that stuff.
I think the Bird Magic. So when I talk to a lot of deep pocket people coming in the hobby, they ask, Eric, and they'll mention this stuff, Zions, Lucas, this and that. I said, man, if you got that kind of money and get to know what they're working with, get a Bird Magic. They're in the fives right now. I feel like that's an $800 to $850 to $1 million card in the next 3 to 5 years, right? There's 22 of them in the Pop Report. It's probably the greatest card ever made in regards to total amount of talent on one picture, right, and one card. I don't see how anybody could argue that. It's got Dr. J, Bird and Magic on it, right? So I think it's probably one of the most iconic basketball cards there is. Stuff like that. And like I said, a Wilt 9, that's a great play right now.
I'm not sure. Are you messing with me, Eric? That's my number. Like, that's my number one card that I probably have quantity of, right?
What, the Bird Magic PSA 10?
Yeah.
Or just,
9s, yeah. And 8s and 9. I mean, I'm just obsessed with that card.
Yeah, I mean, and it should be. I think that's now granted, it had a really high print run, kind of like the 86 Fleer Jordan or 86 Fleer anything, had a high print run. But I think that card is and will be, if the market pivots and continues to go down the vintage spectrum in basketball, as it has, because if you look at everything, vintage soccer has grown, vintage baseball has grown. As sports start to transcend forward through time, people will then start to harken back onto the vintage and the origin of that sport, right? So as long as that behavior pattern holds true, then it'll happen the same thing for basketball. And that's where it's really going to be big, because a lot of these vintage basketball cards in high grade just don't exist. What is there, 6 or 5 Russell 9s? Or is it,
well, so many miscuts, so many off-centers in those sets, right? They're almost impossible to gem.
Plus, like with the Bird Magic 9, I mean, I think there's just over 600 9s in the pop, but it's less than that because I've cracked out 20 or 30 myself. I know other people, so I would guess the pop one that's closer to 500, and I have like 80 of them. So it's like, so on the market, there's about 400 of those available. And that's a card that just, to me should be, it's the reason I keep buying them is like, that's like kind of what you just spoke of. Like, to me, you have Bird Magic rookie on the same card. It's in, it's ridiculous that card's worth that. And then a Zion exquisite could sell for $100,000. Like, to me, it blows my mind sometimes. So
Zion National Treasures was hitting 200,000-300,000, and I just couldn't wrap my head around it. At the end of the day, he's an amazing talent. I get it. Now the Pelicans are good now, right? But at the time, he was a Pelican, and his cards were, and they were a horrible team, barely a playoff team, and his cards were selling for more money, double, when the team was bad than they are right now. So just think about that, right? So what has already been baked into that?
Hype. Yeah, like you said, it's like a 5-year window, right? So he's getting, toward that window where it's time to do something. Otherwise, what's going to happen to the market. But it's funny you guys mentioned the Bird Magic, because when I started to diversify and I wanted to get in some, better, older basketball cards, that was the number one card I wanted to get. I love that card. I think the point you made with those 3 guys in the card, Eric, in terms of talent in the card, is such a great point. It's just a great
parallel.
Yeah, definitely.
It's simply unfair. And another, let's pivot to baseball for a little bit, because that's really my wheelhouse is vintage baseball and Negro League players, right? That's really where my knowledge base shines. If we look at and go forward to like 2050, let's fast forward about 25, 30 years, right? There's only going to be a few players that really matter from the past 25 years, right? You've got Jeter, Ichiro, Pujols, and I guess you could throw Miggy in there because he's got, I would throw Miggy in there just because of his hits totals, home run totals, and the longevity and the fact that he won a Triple Crown, right? So you could throw him on there. But that really, if people go, I would even put Trout in there now because we haven't seen Fat Trout yet.
Is Griffey in there for you?
Yeah, but I look at Griffey because that's 89, right? So you're going back another, right? And now that's only a few years before Jeter, but I would definitely put Griffey in there, right? And that's about it. So I can't see many more, and that's just that's just hitters, of course. We hadn't talked about pitchers. I really don't do a lot of pitchers because the ROI isn't there. I might do them to collect them, but not for investment purposes. So you're talking about maybe 5 people that really matter, right? And the Griffey, that's a couple cards that's to pick from. You go after those, right? The rest, I think that's an underplayed one right now, is Miggy. Pujols, his chrome refractors, if you can get them, I think they'll start pulling back probably in the next 6 to 8 months. They'll start getting back down to the $25,000, $30,000 range. I think that's a great play. 9.5s, of course, PSA 10s are impossible, right? You're paying hundreds of thousands. I think those chrome refractor autos for Pujols is a great play as they start to rescind. I think a really good play, now granted, the pop report's kind of high, but the prices are really, really favorable, is the Jeter foil in the 9.5. Now, we got to wait and see how Beckett pans out. Are they going to change anything? But you look at the difference in price cost in the Jeter PSA 10, which is selling the past couple sold at 204, so 204,000, which is the Jeter 9.5 now probably sells about $6,000, right? So that's an astronomical difference, So I think the Jeter 9.5 is probably a good long-term play. Start stacking a couple of those, set them aside for what the cost entry point is.
The same could be said, I guess, about the Fleer Jordan, right? But when I think about the Jeter, the foil that you're discussing, the pop count on that is insane. Just the PSA pop report, aren't there over 20,000 of those? That's, I think, what's always really scared me about that Jeter foil is like, unless you're telling me it's going to be the Jordan, the Fleer Jordan, which I just don't see it becoming that. Like,
well, the Jeter,
that pop report scares the crap out of me.
You mean the pop report or print run?
No, I think the PSA pop report, I think in total grades.
Well, yeah, but so I wouldn't.
Eights, 9s, and 10s isn't absurd though.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm talking about like a 9.5, a Jeter 9.5.
Yeah.
Not the 8s, not the 9s. PSA 10 at 204, I think it's a steal. There's 20 or 21 of those in the pop report. If I had a customer, I'd be like, look, buy 5 of those for $1 million. That's what I would do. You're not losing money on. Oh yeah, at that point you bought 5 out of a pop 20 or 21 card. You literally just cornered a quarter of the market right there on an iconic card. I think he's got 4 or 5 rings. He's gonna go down as probably one of the greatest hitters in our generation, or greatest players. I wouldn't say hitters, but greatest players. One of the most iconic players, if you will.
I'm a big fan of that card just because he played in New York his whole career, and the people that are going to collect him. Like, New York has more money than any other city in the world. Yep. So the amount of money in New York, the fan bases, it's like, you said it's a pop 22. Like, are there 25 millionaires in Detroit or in New York that are willing to spend crazy money on that card? And it's like, the answer long-term is probably yes.
I know several people that own 2 or more copies. So it goes from 21 to 10 real fast.
Wow.
One guy, a buddy of mine, owned 5 just like several months ago. Well, so the pop report gets really small. Now the Beckett 9.5, I think there's like 150, 175 of them, a couple hundred of those, but it's not $200,000. It's $6,000.
Yeah.
Right. So
I'm not a Beckett fan, but like at some point the arbitrage is like, it can't shrink. For it to be that big a gap is a little absurd. So at some point there's an argument to be made. And like, I did see those 2 sales a couple weeks ago when I was like, okay, that's too big a gap. Like, it shouldn't be 204 versus, because a PSA 9 is like 4 or 5,000. So it basically sold for just over the price of a PSA 9.
Yeah, and the pop count's so much smaller. But I look at it this way. So, and this is kind of where I'm going with this, Rob, is if you believe in the 10, because again, rising tides lift all ships. If you believe in the PSA 10 at the peak, they were like 650, 600K. If you believe in it going from 204 to 450, Okay, it doesn't even have to go back to 600. If it just goes from 200 to 400, then the 9.5s will go from 6 to 15. I don't see how that doesn't almost triple in value. I could see that happening. Now, again, the 9.5 isn't going to go from 6 to 50. It might, but I wouldn't tell a customer that. But if you're looking somewhere to park a very small amount of money that's safe with almost no downside, because if you buy them for 6,500, what's your risk? $1,000? Really? I don't see that card going sub 5K, right? So I would stack those. If you had 65 or 70 grand, I'd say just buy 10 of those and park that aside, as opposed to, one $60,000 card. And that's kind of the play as it started this conversation, Rob, is where I would tell somebody to do. If you're going to do that, that seems a lot better, especially if you believe in the PSA 10. Because at some point here in the next 3 to 6 months, the 10s are just going to dry up. And then the next sale is going to be 325 or 350. And then the 9.5s will start to just go up slowly after that.
Wow.
Kevin's over here saying, what kind of damage I could do in the Brady market with 200K?
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't know. Should I leave the chat? I don't know. I mean, I'm definitely not in this wheelhouse of high-end cards, but, it's funny you mentioned I was having the BGS 9.5 versus PSA 10 conversation with a good friend of mine the other day. And we've always been a believer that the gap will close, but if anything, in the past 2 to 3 years, it's widened. So I'm starting to question that belief a little bit. So I don't know. It's an interesting debate.
I could tell you why, but that's a whole other conversation to be had.
I have my thoughts on that too, but it does seem like safe money, like you mentioned, Eric. And right now, the only money people want to spend is safe money because of the losses some people have encountered in the past year. So it is good to have some safe spots. Like you said, you spend 65 or whatever they're at, and what's it going to go to 5? Worst case scenario, that seems safe,
And it's honestly probably a good something that you could use as trade bait, right?
Yeah,
it's also a good filler, right? I mean, at 6,500, you'd probably get at spot on comps within a few $100. If you want to fill that in, let's say you're trying to get a $20,000 card, you got a Jeter 9.5. Somebody's not going to turn that down. If somebody came to me with a $6,500 Burrow or 6,500 like a Jeter 9.5, I'm taking the Jeter. Like, he's Hall of Fame, first ballot. The guy's going in over 3,000 hits. I mean, I'm taking that all day long. Like you said, it's safe money. Now, on to Tom Brady, as you were talking about earlier, I think between now and the next 3 years is probably the best time to buy Tom Brady.
The window. That's what
window, man.
Can't tell you the conversations I've had with people. This is the window right now.
I think within 2 months, if they get, because they're probably going to go in, it's a playoff, as with a losing record, they'll probably go in, right? So they go in the playoffs, probably get bumped out in the first round. Totally cool with that. I think within 2 to 3 months after his first round playoff exit, then that's the time to buy. Like, literally let the entire NFL season go by and then wait a couple months after that. Brady's stuff will continue to go down, and then just buy that stuff. Because people, I think, have just been spoiled with Brady because he's been around for 20,000 years.
It's like people get tired of the greatness, so to speak.
Yeah.
I'm just going to note the 102 mark on here when you said Brady's going to get knocked out the first round.
Yep.
Because
well, listen, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm not convinced they're even going to make the playoffs, to be honest with you.
I'll remember that too, because everybody's doubted. I mean,
every year they do, and they're always wrong.
Brady has a higher percentage of making to the Super Bowl than Steph Curry has of making a 3-pointer.
Yep, I remember that's an incredible stat.
So when people are start saying, "Oh, Brady," I think it's hilarious. I mean, the guy has proven himself that he's just kind of coasting along, and then next thing you know, they're in the and it's like, how the hell did this happen again? So I wouldn't completely underestimate the fact. I do agree though, if they do miss the playoffs, that window of stuff, because people have such short memories, great buying opportunity. If you're thinking about investing in Brady, for 5-10 years from now, when they if they do get bumped out, that window right there is, out of sight, out of mind. Like, right now is a great time. I'm buying a ton of baseball of modern guys that I think could be good, like Julio, not because I think they're going to be good or I know anything. I'm going to sell them before the season starts, because to me, I don't want to gamble. I'm not here to gamble on modern players, other than the fact that I know in March there's going to be a lot of hype around Bobby Witt, Julio Rodriguez, and all these other guys. So timing is everything, and it's going to be a great Brady opportunity time if he does miss the playoffs.
Well, I mean, the best time to sell these young quarterbacks is right before the season starts too, right? You get the hype train, so it's so funny. It seems like there's 1 or 2 quarterbacks at the national every year that are the guys that people are looking for, right? So for me, everybody was asking about Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts this year, rightfully so, right? But it's almost like people forget who the GOAT is and who always will be the GOAT. And then the guy who fell through the cracks was Mahomes, which just cracked me up, right? It's almost like we talked about how people are like tired of the greatness. Mm-hmm. The guy made 4 straight AFC championship games. He went to 2 Super Bowls. He's won 1. Some of these young quarterbacks right now will be lucky to have that as their career. Never mind, in the first 4 to 5 years. So it's like, all the young gun hype when, the guys who are solidified are sitting right in front of you who are great buys. And I want to go back to something you said, Eric, about trade bait with the Jeter, right? And how if the card goes down, it's still good trade bait. People don't want to sell cards for losses right now. Who the hell wants to do that? I get that, right? But a great way to get out of a card you're upside down is to trade it, right? Because you can trade it into something that you have more confidence in long-term, a bigger card. Like you mentioned, hey, you could use one of that Jeter 9.5 to get into a $20,000 card. Well, if you like that $20,000 card long-term, you think that's a good play, take your loss on that card, use it as trade bait. It's less cash you have to spend, and cash, is an issue for people right now. So I think that's a great way to potentially get out of some of the cards that you're upside down on into bigger cards. And that's a good play.
Yeah. And one thing, so one of the Jeter people looking in to get a Jeter, the subs matter on that card. Because I saw one that had 2 10s, a 9.5 and a 9. And that thing went for like 35 or 40 grand.
Oh, wow.
That was last month, I think, like 5 or 6 weeks ago. So if you find a True Gem Plus with 10 centering or 10 corners or a True Gem on a Jeter, you're probably going to pay 15 to 17 grand versus a mini gem. It's probably going to be about 6 grand. So the subs, it's basically the equivalent of the 86 Fleer. Subs really matter, like on a Jeter. And you all know the subs matter on 86 Fleer as well. Whereas a True Gem Plus, I think the last True Gem Plus of an 86 Fleer went for like mid 70s, whereas a mini gem's 26, 27 grand. So, almost a 3x multiplier at that point. And the Jeter can do the same thing. If you had a True Gem Plus Jeter, it'd probably go for 50, 2 10s, 2 9.5s. I can see that in 50, as well.
BGS 10 or Black Label would be pretty crazy in that card.
Oh wow,
that'd be nasty. A BGS 10 would be, and this whole thing, we haven't even seen a BGS 10 Jordan come up. I still think that's a 7-figure card. There are cards that still haven't come up yet, even though Beckett's kind of pulled back a lot. I think those uber rare cards. I had one. I sold one 8-9 years ago. I should have kept. I sold it 7 years ago. So that one I probably should have kept. The Kobe Black Labels probably should have kept both of those.
I've hit 2 of the 5, or there might be 6 now, but I've hit 2 of the 5 or 6 Jordan BGS 10s, and I've bought and sold the card 6 or 7 times, and I think the lowest I bought one was for $44,000, which is unheard of right now, and the highest I sold one for was $150,000, which was also at the time I felt almost bad, selling it for that, but the guy wanted it. So I think it would probably, and like I said, I'm not a big Beckett guy, but I think that would be, it might be $1 million card right now. I mean, it just, with all the hype, but let's, Rob, we keep just going crazy off rant, where else were you at on some?
No, listen, I love it. I mean, we're at the hour 10 mark, so we are running out of time. But I think my last question to you guys, because you guys covered so much in what everyone's been saying. My last question is, if someone is in the low end to mid end range, right, like really dealing with cards maybe in the high hundreds or like 1,000 to 2,000. Do you guys have any kind of, I don't know if I want to say advice or any kind of ideas on how they can try to consolidate and level up into getting 1 or 2 big cards? Because I've never met a person in the hobby that doesn't have a grail card, right? That doesn't have a big card that they're going after. So are there any I don't know if I want to say advice, but any advice on how to really take that next jump and to get a bigger card, like the kind of card that'll stop someone in their tracks?
Yeah, so I mean, from my standpoint as a dealer, like I always tell my friends, go to a show with ammo. It's like if you have some targets at a show and go with some ammo in terms of some cards you want to trade, right? I think that now more than ever, like we talked about the Brady window, buying Brady in the next 2 or 3 years. I think the window, for being able to trade out of some of your lower end stuff and high end stuff is right now. because there's a lot of dealers out there who are willing to trade down on higher end cards to get stuff that's more liquid because it's easier to move, right? We talked about the fact that people aren't walking into shows with the backpacks of cash that they used to. There's only really one show that happens at, right? So from a dealer standpoint for myself, I'm definitely willing to take on, if I'm moving a $5,000 card, I'm willing to take on, 5, 10, 15 different cards that are safe that I know I can move quick, and less cash on your end. So, I mean, listen, for me, from a deal perspective, if I'm moving a bigger card, I always want some cash in the mix. But I'm always willing to take on some trade, especially more so now than ever. So I think that, if you're looking to pick up a grail or pick up a card you've been looking at for a while, especially now when you're probably watching it go down in value and you're wondering, oh, is this the floor? What should I do? Now's the time. Because I think that a lot of people right now are willing to take on more lower end trade towards some of those cards than they have been in the past. I know that includes myself in that conversation.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point that I've brought up to people in the past is being able to trade up. And I think like you guys have said, and like I've seen, I've talked to a lot of dealers who are just really willing to trade down now. They're holding cards that are 5K or more, and people are not really going to shows with 5K or more cash anymore. And if they are, they're being super, super selective. So I've seen dealers willing to trade down in ways that I would have never imagined 18 months ago. You know what I mean? So, yeah, I think that's a great point. Great point. Come with ammo, come with your stuff. It never hurts to, if you're trying to reach a goal, it never hurts to have some liquid cards, right? Like you guys said, a Fleer Jordan, always going to be a liquid card. You'll always be able to throw that in the mix. Just like Eric said, if you have a Jeter foil, always you'll be able to throw that in the mix for a card. So I think just having that ammo for sure makes sense.
And the other thing I'll add in, because I've had some buddies who have gone to 2 to 3 shows and they said, well, I'm bringing ammo like you said, but nobody wants my stuff. Well, it's time to sell your stuff. And it's a lesson to be learned, right? So I can't tell you the amount of Zach Wilson, Trevor Lawrence, it's the same guys. All these young quarterbacks, people come with stacks. Say, hey, I want this Brady rookie. Can we work out some type of deal? And the answer politely is, I don't have any use for this stuff right now. Back to what Jason said, 6,000 different Trevor Lawrence rookie cards. I think you said over 1,000 one-on-ones. I think there's 44 or 45 different Tom Brady rookie cards, right? So it's like, if you've brought your ammo to 2 to 3 shows and you haven't been able to move it, probably time to sell it and take your loss and learn your lesson, right? In terms of having the right stuff to trade up to some of those grails that you want to have for the long term.
I would definitely take advantage of the seasons. I mean, like whether it's trading up or down or buying and selling. I mean, in this business historically, I mean, you can make 20 to 25% on your money, like by literally just buying baseball right now and selling it in 4 months. So when it comes to trading up, do the same thing. Like take some items that you'll be able to buy back in the off season. And maybe, if Brady's really hot right now and it's off season baseball, use those hot items to trade for something. And in that negotiation, use that as leverage. I mean, somebody may want to cash in right now and not have to wait. If you have enough time to wait the 3 or 4 months, that's huge. Like someone may take a deal now because they know that they'll be able to turn that money or those cards over right away and make their money. And if you're willing to wait, I mean, you may be able to get a 25% discount of what something's trading for now versus, in a few months from now.
Yeah. Well said. And yeah, I guess on that, let's wrap it up, guys. So if you have any final thoughts, anything that you want to throw out there, if not, we can go around and we'll, just say your name and how they can reach you if they want to, after the show. Kevin.
Yeah. First off, this was awesome, guys. I had a blast. Once again, I was definitely the little fish in this high-end card conversation, which is actually great because I'm sitting here listening to somebody. I'm like, well, this is awesome to hear about, right? And I always tell people, like, as high-end as you think you have, there's always many people out there who have more high-end stuff, right? So there's always things to learn and people to look up to. So this has been awesome. I really appreciate it. Once again, I'm Kevin to Captain 37 Sports Cards on Instagram. DM me on there anytime. And the other thing I'll end with too. Is, doing high-end deals, and Eric mentioned the word trust earlier and how it's so important for him to build up a trust factor with his, clientele and his clients. It's so huge, right? There's a reason why you see some of the same bigger dealers always doing high-end deals, right? Because they're able to build that trust factor. And, a lot of the people that I've done my biggest deals with are friends and people I've done big deals with before. So there's that trust factor. The other thing I'll say too is, if you're new to the high-end market and you don't feel comfortable there, get yourself a support system. I got 3 go-to people on my phone who I will call or text before closing any high-end deal just to get their advice. I think it's important.
Your priest, your wife.
Yeah, right. So I think it's important to have that, especially if you're not well-versed in doing high-end deals. Because you never want to do a deal where you're super pumped up about the high-end deal and you get the card in, you do some more research like, oh my God, I just took a bath, right? So I think it's so important to have people you can go to and talk to kind of get that reassurance. Kind of like when I do fantasy football trades, it's the same deal, right? So, it's just good to have that. And I'm grateful for that and all the friends I've made in the hobby. And this has been a great experience. And I appreciate the conversation with you guys.
Yeah.
Yeah. Eric Meyers. And the best way to reach me is Instagram, Howie_hustle. I'm on there 24/7. I probably do this all day, every day, whether I'm dealing with customers at PWCC or dealing with cards in my own time. It's, it's pretty much my life at this moment. And yeah, if I had any other advice, I love, Kevin's mention of support system. You're really only as good as the knowledge you have, so always learn how to check the comps proper, make sure you do your due diligence, and have a strong support system of people you trust in areas that maybe you might be weak on, especially, if you're not a savant in certain areas, find people who are and help them out and they will help you out.
Jason at OTS Sports across all social media handles. I guess my advice would be, don't jump in head for, take it slow, learn everything. From my experience, I've just noticed, I have a lot of people who like me and I have a few people who hate me and they're jealous and, and that's fine. It doesn't bother me, but I want people to know that this didn't just happen overnight. This has been 30 years in the making of I've made a ton of mistakes in deals. I've lost a ton of money. I've made a ton of money, but I've learned a lot. And I think people coming in, they see some of this stuff and they just think, it's going to happen overnight, and it's not. So I remember buying and selling dollar. I mean, I still do. I love the hobby. Rob can attest to this. When I met Rob, we did $1,000 deal of junk because I'm addicted to just buying everything and anything, whether it's $1 million card or a dollar card.
Yeah.
So I really like Kevin's advice. You have, I know a lot about wax, but I'm not 100% wax expert, but I know the people who are, so I can call them and get advice on jerseys. I know everybody that I can reach out to get a really good, because we make a lot of emotional decisions and a lot of quick decisions when, maybe we shouldn't, and we should step back and kind of analyze the situation. So with all that being said, I would just don't get overwhelmed with what you see. And, even looking at Rob's cards, but those are some amazing cards that he didn't just go buy last week at a show, that happened over time, and all this happens over time. For me, it was, it's been 30 years. So just take it slow, start small, learn, meet a lot of people. If you're a good judge of character, you'll find the good people in the hobby, the bad people in the hobby, and so it's just building this network. Having the network is almost as important as, everything else. So there's just so much more that goes into it than just, buying a deal and understanding all of that. So, start slow and don't get overwhelmed. Just take it easy, and you'll end up in a good spot.
I love it. Well, Kevin, Eric Meyers, Jason Koonce, thank you so much for coming on the show. It was a pleasure having you guys, and look forward to having you guys back and maybe continuing this conversation one day. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob.
Sounds good, Rob.